Hello everyone and welcome to today's Logie Baird 2020 The End of the Broadcast webinar. My name is Lindsay Callahan and I'm a Community Manager at the IET, and I work alongside our volunteers in the local and technical networks, including the organiser of this webinar, the Media Technical Network. The Technical Network is driven by groups of volunteers who work or have experience within the media industry and promotes the sharing and advancement of knowledge through various activities. We have an online community which is over 400 members, featuring blogs, videos and pictures, and if you'd like to join the community, there's a link in the resources box. We also have a webinar hub where you can see upcoming webinars and the on-demand ones that we've hosted before. These are great for CPD, and again, there's a link in the resources box. Once the presentations are complete, you can download your CPD certificate using the console below, and more information can be found on CPD by clicking on the link. There are some polls throughout the presentation, which we would appreciate if you could take part in, and we'll also have a feedback form at the end, and it would be great if you could take a few minutes to fill it in, because this helps us produce events that we know will be of interest to the audience. I'm going to highlight a few of the widgets that you can see along the bottom of your screen. You can open one by simply clicking on it and closing it by minimising it. You should see a Q&A box on the right-hand side. If you can't see it, there is a purple box that you can click and open it. Please type in any questions during the presentations and we will see these and try and get through as many as we can at the end. If you're having any technical issues, please refresh with F5 or use the yellow question mark button, which will take you to the help pages. If an issue persists, please put it in as a Q&A and we'll deal with it immediately. For slow connections or if your slides aren't moving, you may have to refresh with F5 several times during the presentation. We also have the Twitter button available, so you can tweet out about the event or see what else is happening within the communities team. That's all from me, and I'm just going to pass on to the host for today and chair of the Media Technical Network, Ian Knock.
This afternoon, this morning, or this evening, depending where you are in the world, we have quite a lot of international attendees, I see from the list already, which is a really, really good thing to see. So we're here to talk about the provocatively titled End of Broadcast, and really it's positioned with a question mark, mainly because we really want to try and allow our experts who are on the panel here who are presenting to actually give their perspectives on whether that really is the truth or not. As introduced by Lindsay, this is the Logie Baird Lecture here in 2020. The Logie Baird Lecture has run for many years, since over the last 20 odd years from the IET. And normally, of course, it's been a physical event taking place in the Savoy Place in London, just on the Embankment, which is the headquarters of the IET. But let me just literally introduce you to a little bit more about the IET and who they are, how long they've been around, and what we actually do. As I said, we are an institute established by Royal Charter, going back now almost 150 years in the various evolutions of the institute itself, starting in 1871. And we will be actually celebrating our 150th anniversary in May next year, which in the next 12 months will be a very exciting set of events taking place, talking about all areas of engineering, and we will obviously be taking part in that. And as I mentioned, we're headquartered at Savoy Place in London, and Savoy Place actually has an interesting bit of history in that for a time period in the very early days, it was the headquarters of the BBC. And very much more interesting for this particular lecture itself, it's the place where Logie Baird held the first demonstration of television to the BBC in March 1929. So it's really got a good long history with the media world coming along. And also the IET is well known in other areas, which we'd like to maybe go into, in the fact that it's actually not maybe heard of, known a little bit by many people, not always talked about within media so much, until you realize that actually it's one of the 6 owners of the IBC, which unfortunately is not taking place this year because of the current virus situation. But you know, it's almost the unheard of, almost the Fight Club of media, in the fact that it's just not talked about. And we're trying to change that by doing much more events, making reference to the IET as a whole, and it's very important role in the entire history of the broadcast industry, coming out of the UK and globally over the last 100 odd plus years. So what I would like to then move on to then is talk a little bit about our background and what we do. The IET Media Technical Network, as Lindsay has said, we're involved in many, many different knowledge events and support to members of the IET, and also members of our community who don't have to be members of the IET itself. We're very much there to actually try and spread understanding of the industry, the role of the industry, the role of engineers as a whole within the media community. So what I would like to also then point out, as Lindsay has with some of the links that are actually in the webinar screens themselves, you can actually come online and join our online community through the IET website. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn, as well as learn a lot more by just visiting the website of the IET at iet.org. So really then going back to the end of broadcast and the subject of today, I think what we have to recognize is that a lot of things have started movements in the last 25, 30 years. And that is a movement where we have been transitioning from a very much broadcast-oriented, transmission-oriented world of television, as people would understand it, with a device in the corner with a big screen on it, with an antenna connection or a satellite dish, etc. And in the last 20 to 25 years, this thing called the internet has started to actually to dig into the world of television and begin to transform it in many respects. And the question really being raised today is that transformation being part of a transition that actually is ultimately going to leave broadcast out in the cold? And we want to really answer that through the presentations from the key experts that we have here today. And looking at the past 25 years, we see laid out here on the screen the number of the key events that have really taken place, including the launch of iPlayer in 2007 here in the UK, which also really transitioned for many people their experience from being a one-way receive video, play it linearly world to a more of an on-demand world piece, and right through until the latest progress that the BBC did in 2018 with their use of iPlayer for delivering 4K high dynamic range football video. So it's we've had a lot of things changing, and we will want to go into what the presenters here today are going to talk about, and to give you sort of further flavour, what has this really meant to the viewer themselves? And what we've seen is that people's viewing habits have been changing with the introduction of the internet. People have been moving much more from what we now call linear, as in sitting there watching the program according to a set schedule, to a non-linear world where customers are watching when they want, where they want, and in the order they wish to do so. And also, additionally, with the introduction of these things, that we've had operators coming into the fray where they've been looking at launching services that are making use of the internet as a whole, rather than the antenna and on your roof or the satellite dish, to actually provide access to that content in both linear and non-linear ways. And the news reports like this are coming out all the time of these sort of changes that are taking place in the industry as a whole. But we also see that these companies are also taking advantage of what the internet brings for extending beyond their existing borders and launching in new markets. With an example here being Sky launching in Spain a couple of years back, where they don't have a traditional broadcast market as such. And additionally, with that, we've got the fact that we're moving on from being simple on-demand catch-up style services or limited video services to where companies are now introducing what I would term full-service platforms, where every aspect of what a consumer would think of as requiring from their television experience are being provided in one-stop shops in what we call aggregators or super aggregators. And that's really been a major change that's been happening just in the last 2 to 3 years. And really, that's the question we really want to answer today. And what I would like to lead you into now is our first question of the day, which we want you to answer right now yourself, to take your view as whether you believe the traditional broadcast over the air or via cable that people have had now and in the past will still have a significant role in this future world of either a hybrid RF broadcast or internet-based approach So what I would like you to do, as I say, to vote now, and we will just take pause for a few moments as I slowly introduce the presenters for you to do that vote. So the presenters today, first off, we actually have Chris Wood from Spicy Mango. He will come and tell you his perspective with regard to the question we have today. And following that, we actually have Yvonne Thomas from the DTG, one of the traditional stalwarts of the traditional broadcast world that have also been pathfinding their way in this new world of hybrid and online television as well. And also, we have another favoured presenter in Nigel Wally, who has got his own eclectic view of consumer view and also the industry view from the commercial perspective. And he will put his message across as well. And then finally up, we will have Maria Ruagueta from Omdia, who will give a much more analyst view of the entire transition if it's actually really happening. And then finally, we will then come into the final part of our webinar today, our lecture today, where we will answer questions from the audience that you raised during the actual presentation and during that session at the end. And hopefully we'll be able to answer all your questions there. And at the same time, we will have another vote at the end of similar nature, and we'll see where we get to there. So what I would like to do now is just waiting for a few more votes maybe to take place. Give it a few seconds more, but then what I'll do there is share with you the vote about what people think, whether broadcast will still have a view or not. And it'll be an interesting perspective when we get to our discussion at the end. So here you go, here's the result. And as you can see there, it's a very concrete yes for the majority of the audience at 74%. So let's see what people think as the presenters go through this now. So without delaying any further, I'd like you to introduce to you Chris Wood of Spicy Mango.
Thanks, Ian. Much appreciated. Okay, so today I promised I would play nicely with my fellow panelists, and I'm going to try to do that, but my job is to really try to convince you of the future of OTT. That said, I'm pretty fair, so I'm going to try to do so in a balanced way as possible. So why the end, right? I don't think this discussion is really about television versus mobile and tablet. I actually believe the television in the living room is likely going to be around for quite a long time. I think what this is about understanding how our requirements are changing, and actually on both sides of the fence as a consumer and a provider. As a consumer, we sort of want features and flexibility. We want recommendations and search. And when I say search, I don't mean, a TV remote pressing the 3 key 3 times to get to a different letter. I want pause and resume and portability and all those cool things. And as a service provider, it's about a better relationship with users. It's about how do we better the user journey? How do we enhance the quality of service, deliver on legal obligations, reporting, that kind of thing. The technology that we have has kind of transformed life over the last 10 years. And the rate of adoption of new ways of watching, for me, just really kind of affirms that things, need to change. So the definition of this, for me, is kind of up for debate, right? I think we're discussing two aspects when we talk about, the end of broadcast. We're talking about, a broadcast to IP transition, which for me is a technology element. And then we're talking about an evolution from linear, not live, which for me is an experience component. So I want to try to kind of just work on those definitions. When we talk about linear, we talk about distribution in a serial form, not as we know it in sort of real time. And when we talk about on demand, we're not suggesting for any moment that we sort of throw away, live events completely, as we'll come to discuss. On the right-hand side of my slide is an Ofcom graphic, and this is a 2019 Media Nations report that said, in 2018, the average person watched about sort of 4 hours, 54 minutes in terms of screen time, across all these different sort of arrays of devices and mechanisms. That kind of breaks down when we look at live TV to 163 minutes. I don't know how people do that. I can't find 163 minutes to do that. But for me, looking at this statistic, live does not mean live. Live means linear. The report is not granular enough to determine and to differentiate the difference between, live TV as we know it versus just sort of linear playout. 99% of the content that we watch on TV is available pre-transmission today. And what we tend to do is really just sort of splice in content, really live content like sports and entertainment. But after 92 years of broadcast, that viewing experience hasn't really evolved too much. If I was going to go back and ask the question of, is what we really want to watch available when we want to watch it? Actually, it kind of is. It's just VOD assets played out in a linear form. The only problem is it's really kind of inaccessible with the broadcast experience as we have it today. So why the change? I think we're driven by a lot of different factors. We're driven by this pull, consumers, manufacturers, and service providers. And when I talk about service providers, I don't just mean the traditional broadcasters and the OTT players. I mean even the social networks, the Instagrams, the Facebooks that are now starting to introduce the notion of video content and live content. For a consumer, there is this sort of attraction of something being available instantly as and when you want it. So the way that, society is watching and interacting is becoming second nature. We pick up our phones, there's video content available. I think the way as well in which we distribute content now doesn't really match the capabilities, or the requirements of today. If we look at our distribution of sort of broadcast and traditional RF and satellite, we have far greater capabilities at our fingertips than we're really ever leveraging. So this slide, for me, sort of represents our expectations as two different personas. It represents what the consumer wants, but also what the service provider needs to enable this and to make this work. For the consumer, a lot of the features that you see on the left-hand side there have become standard. User-generated content platforms like YouTube have these things, right? You don't need to be an enterprise service provider or content owner to own and operate these kind of capabilities. From a service provider and what they need to deliver, if we take something like DRM, the studios are demanding much higher levels of protection on assets to try to stem the piracy flow. The broadcast technologies and the methods that we have are really not doing a lot to try to stem the problem. People generally pirate because of the unavailability of content, not because they're cheap. The way that we distribute today, I think we're kind of reaching the limits of technology and its capability to try to prevent that problem. HDCP is now 20 years old, right? CAS Video Guard was launched in 1994. These are great technologies, but there's only so much that you can really do, and the methods of delivery are the same. The OTT experiences today that deliver these capabilities are kind of doing so without a satellite, an EPG, or a grid in sight. So the new broadcast, I don't think this is really a question of satellite to IP distribution. I think it's an experience change. What we have right now is a sort of proven model, right? We've proven that we no longer consume sort of 4 channels through an aerial on a roof anymore. I think as a society, we're much more savvy to change. We're aware of it, and we're fine with that. Our VOD libraries and our stores in our cable and satellite boxes, our Sky stores and the equivalent in Virgin, are they kind of demonstrating that shift as well? Is there sort of already an acknowledgement there that, we're sort of heading that way? I think to make the transition, there are really 2 hurdles that we need to overcome. One is, real content parity in an IP world, the ability to go out and buy an IP subscription, that's not tied to a satellite subscription or a cable subscription. I shouldn't have to have a box in my lounge to go watch the array of channels that I want to watch in an IP world. And I think also, as far as the experience goes, we need to move away from spoon feeding, right? This kind of linear channel is one person's curated view of the world. It's what one person thinks, we should be watching program after program after program, right? I think we need to trust our audiences to explore and consume the content that they want to get access to. If the loss of a linear channel is the hurdle, then actually OTT has kind of been simulating linear for a lot of years now, right? We could present a grid of VOD objects accessible, against a time boundary. We can set arbitrary sort of deadlines of when that VOD object in a catalog is available to access. DVR and time shift are really just sort of pointers to objects that exist in a VOD library or a VMS or a CDN. But I think how as an industry do we get consensus over not fooling our audience. And I think, what I mean by this is the notion of sort of recording shows to a set-top box in a lounge that we're already serving out as VOD assets on a playout server, right? It's really kind of wasteful. I mean, a couple of years back, we had the argument over single copy versus shared copy. This kind of really stemmed from the rights holders. Maybe this is something where, the rights holders, also need to sort of step up to the plate and really sort of try to make the journey and the transition for us, a lot easier. I mean, OTT has a raft of usual benefits, right? We're all usually aware of these things. I think we get true flexibility, we get more control, the ability to consume content whenever and wherever we want it. We get a consistent cross-platform experience. I can pick up my phone versus my tablet, even go to my TV with my Chromecast or my Apple TV and get a relatively consistent and same experience. For the service provider, they can add features and capabilities almost instantly through an app push. Those things are available. We don't have to try to push firmware updates to a box. We get to leverage the innovation from the CE manufacturers right out the gate. We don't really have to do a lot other than enable those capabilities in an app to sort of make that work. And as a service provider, I can understand my user in detail. I can start to tailor my experiences. And that's a really, really key benefit. I think for me, one of the greatest attractions of the OTT world is being able to shift our capabilities to the edge. And what do I mean by this? I mean, getting out of this notion of doing something once in a head end and it just being accessible to an entire country or audience. We have an ability here to shift to content based on a unique user or an environment, not just a geography or a region. What you're looking at in the sort of left-hand side of that picture is, the same football match occurring, but with technology at the client that allows replacement of advertising boards, right? This is not something done at a head-end level. On the right-hand side, we get features like switchable sports data and overlays. We get all the advertising capabilities and the monetization that comes with this. It's all generating data behind the scenes to be able to understand, the audience and develop and enhance those experiences. So I wouldn't agree that our progression to OTT is really a question anymore, right? And Ian has touched upon some of these little milestones that we're seeing here and some of these dates. The launch of 3G is a real enabling technology. In the introduction of screens bigger than sort of 50 pixels by 50 pixels squared really sort of started this revolution. Yeah, the introduction of iPhone and Android really, kicked things off here. But for me, I kind of think the broadcast industry is lagging a bit by quite a big margin. I think OTT has exploded because it understands the market. It's offering the right product at the right price, and it's solving the user problem. There is, I think, an acknowledged and fairly sort of unspoken thought that the traditional broadcaster has a real fear of self-cannibalization, right? Chewing up its own subscribers and converting people from satellite services and cable subscriptions into OTT subscriptions. But the reality is that the competition is going to steal the user base away very, very quickly if the mindset is not changed. The global tech companies, the Apples, the Amazons, the Facebooks, these guys have got incredibly deep pockets. Content is king, but content is now a bidding war that the service providers and the broadcasters are going to find it very, very difficult to win. There's a recent example of Disney pulling back content from Sky and Virgin. More and more providers are doing the same to their own owned and operated platforms. It's going to become very, very hard for people to get access to the content in the way that maybe they traditionally did. So I said I'd produce a fairly balanced view, and I'm going to try to. Moving forwards, this is not going to be an easy play, right? I think there is still a lot that we need to try to figure out. There is an infrastructure challenge, but we're very, very close. And, in a lot of discussions that I have when we start to talk about, the infrastructure limitations and connectivity, is it bad? It's not the best, it's not perfect, but it's not horrendous. Some Ofcom reports estimate 53,000 premises with no access to good broadband or 4G coverage from any operator. Nobody wants that. It's not a good number, but we're not talking hundreds of thousands, right? Is that enough of a limiting factor to be holding this back? I'm not sure. Building OTT solutions is a bit of a different mindset. the reality as a platform architect like this is that we don't have kind of standards bodies for the platform sides of OTT for enterprise architecture and delivery. The standards that we have really sort of stop at the video side. We know about MPEG and DVB and SMPTE and very recently things like Dash, but the ability to build what I call sort of control plane services, those things aren't standardized or templated really. The other thing I think we need to be mindful of is the live production workflow. And I mean live as in real live, sort of sports and entertainment, not kind of played out linear. As OTT, we're very, very lucky. We kind of get presented to us this cable at the end of a broadcast chain or a playout process that we're able to use and consume to provide to OTT simulcast. All of a sudden, if our traditional sort of broadcast processes change, is that an end of that output? What happens to OTT? Are we going to be prepared to sort of, pick up that realm and run with that and manage that sort of live production aspect? Will that still be there? I kind of hope so. In summary, for me, I don't think what we have is a technology problem. I really think this is more of maybe a little bit of a commercial and definitely a mindset problem. And I think we're sort of already on this journey to really make this happen. I think we need to embrace the threat that we have around self-cannibalization and use it as a driver. Or I think traditional broadcast is probably going to really struggle. It's going to sink. OTT as a technology and as a platform and an ecosystem has proven itself time and time again. And I think for me, it's really about time that we started to embrace it. Thank you very much. I'm now going to pass over to Yvonne Thomas from the DTG and invite her to take the stand. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world. So at the end of the broadcast, as a question, is definitely coming with different dimensions. Definitely, it's an evolution, and therefore it has a timing aspect. So in the very history, when we look back at the dinosaurs, typically the biggest and strongest were the ones to survive. Nowadays, it's certainly the ones that can quickly adapt to the market needs, not necessarily just being the biggest. If we look at the status quo of what the UK landscape looks like, it's pretty well prepared. It's very dynamic. It has a very good repetition and good scale of the UK television content production, and there's also very high demand for content and high quality content from the consumers. The UK also is a very dynamic and well-established R&D environment, and definitely with the advantage that English language content is something that offers the opportunity to sell at an international level as well. So overall, the UK landscape is well prepared. And if we look at content delivery overall, I think we need to admit that there are certain layers. And the first is really the technology layer. Are we talking about broadcast in the way of OTT versus DTT, or are we actually considering the business layer? Because that's really the difference that we have to watch out. OTT can also provide a linear experience, but definitely offers a lot more features than DTT would be able to. So certainly people watch OTT content because there are certainly some features that they would benefit from. So it's a complementary reason that they watch video on demand to have an increased choice of content. They have more control when and where they watch content. It's a bit of giving the desire when they want to binge watch a series or something, they can just simply do so. I do that myself. I mean, I have my favorite TV series, but often I don't have time. So on the weekend, I just catch up on what happened during the week. And then I can even continue live on the live linear television, basically. So it gives me much more flexibility also in my private life, and is certainly something that feels much better to be introduced in my daily routine. So obviously, whether a service provider wants to choose a more subscription-based or advertised-based platform, that's really a business decision. Simply also addressing a different audience. With the subscription, you can provide more exclusive, high-quality content, whereas with advertised-based video on demand, it's also addressing a younger audience that is more cost sensitive, but also accepts the fact that there are adverts, and they just accept the fact that there might be some interruptions, but that's fine because they're spending less money or actually no money on that. So that's definitely a choice. And at the DTG, we've just recently launched the State of the Nation report, which we do on an annual basis. You can go on our website, dtg.org.uk, and non-members also have at least access to a summary. Members obviously have access to the full report. And here, this is just a snapshot of various platforms and also niche, sometimes at least some niche platforms that provide the variety of content that's available on the market. So you see already here that the situation is quite complex in terms of the business aspect. So what, as the consumer, which kind of platform do you choose? And obviously you don't want to pay for each of the platforms that you like. And there might be maybe the kids are, definitely want Disney Plus to watch all the Disney movies, but then maybe mom and dad want something different, maybe Sky for the dad for watching football, but Netflix maybe for mom to enjoy a couple of series. So it's definitely this mixture of whatever your needs are, and maybe even looking for some niche content as well. So the aspect of aggregation, I think, becomes very, very essential. And that is something that comes back also to the business needs again. When we look from a perspective of the consumer, having one big bubble in this sheet would be the perfect solution. You've one platform, access everything through your TV set or your mobile device. But business-wise, as a content owner, obviously want to have much more control over when and where your content is being played back. So there's a bit of a lack of interest, or at least a conflict of interest from the business side and from the consumer side that we have to solve. So just as an overview, I mean, it's definitely up to you, as I said, choosing the right model. There's certainly advantages and disadvantages to each of the platforms, where they want more a quality target, or where they want just to go for the mass market as well. So, I mean, if we look at the younger audience, between the 16 and 25-year-olds, 2/3 of their content is IP delivered. So they have a very fragmented viewing behavior. They watch their content through social media platforms, through any kind of video on demand platforms. And so for broadcasters, it's really the challenge to maintain the relevance to this younger audience. So to better understand what their needs are, and also to serve the content at the place where this generation is. So having more of a hybrid model is certainly the way forward. Also keeping in mind that it's definitely a very high challenge, because broadcasters have some legacy to carry. So they have to serve various platforms, whereas more native grown platforms in the IP world, they're a lot more flexible to decide where they want to be without carrying all that legacy. So that's really the challenge. So with the trend of IP delivered content, then certainly the infrastructure needs to be thought of. And in the UK, the government is very keen to get full fiber coverage until 2025. So I think it will be interesting to see in the next couple of years whether this will increase simply the content consumption, or whether this will be a higher demand for a higher quality content, meaning, for example, UHD, so 4K, maybe even 8K in the future, virtual reality content, and so on. So I think that that's something to be figured out and to see and observe until, in the next 5 years. But certainly a very, very important element in order to deliver this content. So for the consumer, it's all about quality of experience. If we look at the ratings, then the consumer would expect that IP delivered content definitely has an equal, if not even a higher quality compared to more traditional TV services. And there's a lot that we have to watch out as an industry. As mentioned, we have to make use of multiple devices. That means to deliver to mobile devices, to the TV at home, to any kind of platforms that are available and wherever you want to be. So it's, again, a business decision. Where do you want to have your content, and fighting the challenge to distribute the content also through technology platform. And so that comes also with a challenge to say, well, actually, we need to serve the people in a very personalized way. For example, a 4K content very likely doesn't make sense to receive on a phone, simply because the screen is so small you would not benefit from this high quality. And therefore, it would be wasted bandwidth to receive a 4K stream. So you need to make sure that you really target the right device for the right audience as well. So scalability and reliability, as well as low latency, becomes much, much more important with the IP delivered content. Likewise, we need to think about the diversity in audience. If we think about millennials and the baby boomers, they have different demands. And this is not just how they explore and discover content and which kind of content, but also we might think about, is UI appropriate for all generations? Especially for an older generation, does it need to be simplified? Is it any different for a younger generation that is used to all the apps and, in their daily lives, all the tools that they work with? So they're very, very tech savvy. So this is also a question that we need to address in order to serve them and increase the quality of experience. Also, one aspect is the cloud that obviously comes with the IP delivered content. And to make use of the cloud means it's faster time to the market. For the content provider, this is certainly an advantage to be more flexible. It also might require less in-house experience or can be outsourced and deals with a lower complexity. At the same time, you can make use of the latest technologies like AI machine learning or any sort of monitoring tools that are stored in the cloud that might be just too expensive to have on site and build it in your own system. And then when we think about multiple devices and a smart home, connected home, then obviously the security aspect becomes very important. So we've also launched a program on the Secure by Design as simple rules for consumers, how they can secure their in-home network. And especially the router is a very, very important element, because through the router, anything can be accessed, whether it's a camera with its microphone, a USB stick, an operating system on your laptop, anything that's connected to your Wi-Fi and to your network. And so we need to simplify and make people aware of what they need to do in order to protect their own data in that entire environment. So this is just, for me, basically also the question, is piracy a threat, and also security, a threat or an innovation boost? So that's always the question, I think, when we deal with any kind of negative implications. Then obviously some innovation will come up and new solutions that we might make great use of. So we've also recently launched an in-home connectivity guide, which we update on a regular basis as well. So this is providing guidance to consumers on best practices. How can they access their content? How can they set up their routers, their network in order to have the best experience, maybe the fastest internet connection throughout their entire homes? How about the retrofit? If I have some old equipment, how can I make use to still receive the latest content formats, or how do you combine the latest devices with an older device as well? So as I mentioned a couple of times, it's really the super aggregator that we all look for, which hasn't come up yet on the market. It's for sure that the media industry and broadcast overall will be diverse in the future. But from the consumer point of view, they will definitely gain for the best experience, for the simplest way to get content. And again, this is somehow in conflict with the demands of our industry, with the business layer. So broadcast will still exist, my opinion, but likely not the way we know it. So it's an evolution. And as mentioned, I think also broadcasters need to adapt to the new technologies, to the new demands of the consumers. There will be definitely still high demands, let's say, in the next 10 to 15 years. Obviously, we all don't know what's happening in the next 20, 30 or 40 years, but there will be definitely a demand for reliable news, for live events, local productions, versus the global stories that Netflix and Amazon, for example, produce, and they have a different mindset when they're produced as global stories, certainly, because that's meant to be for the entire global market and not necessarily just for the global market. Trust will be still a very important factor, whether more traditional versus the new content providers. And we shouldn't forget the sustainability aspect. So broadcast is still the most efficient way to deliver content in any kind of aspect. That's why we call it broadcast and not having an individual stream. But certainly we know that OTT, even though at the moment we know it's not the most efficient system, provides more advanced features. So it's kind of a balance between this efficiency versus the experience. And yeah, so overall, I think everything will be integrated. So a mix of the broadcast and IP services on your TV set. So also to please consumer for this user experience, for a unified user experience. And what will be very, very interesting also to see once we have OTT providers entering the live and linear market. So we've just recently seen the news that Amazon is at least considering adding a live TV to Amazon Prime. There are no details known at the moment. We know they're in discussion with content owners, and it's yet to be identified whether they might include even news, whether they might enter into the more traditional content provider market, or whether it's just a live channel full of series and movies. And this is really the interesting question. What happens if the new OTT providers enter in the linear market? And I think that's still an open question, and something that we will also look into, and how competitive that will be, certainly. So yeah, with this introduction, I like to hand over to our next speaker, so Nigel Woolley from Decipher. And yeah, Nigel, I think it's your turn now.
Thank you. I'm just pausing briefly to make sure that the transition to my camera and my microphone has happened. Thank you very much for that, Yvonne. That was a great job. So I come at this from a slightly different perspective. I run a media consultancy, Decipher, that focuses mainly on the consumer experience. So we like to think that we are a very tech literate consultancy, but we're not a tech consultancy. So our focus on this question at the end of broadcast comes from understanding the consumer reaction to the new technologies that are emerging in the UK market. And so I wanted to make a couple of kind of overview comments. First of all, very often when we have conversations about the future of television, there are kind of two perspectives put forward. And we hear phrases like TV and digital and TV and the internet. And very often TV, however you define it, is illuminated with this kind of picture you're seeing on the left of the screen here. So old-fashioned television that wouldn't have worked, particularly in the UK, won't have worked since about 2012 at least. And then anything else, anything to do with the internet or technology, is illuminated with these sci-fi pictures as you're seeing on the right of the screen. And I always have a kind of a real problem with this, because everything we've talked about so far today is TV as far as I'm concerned, and everything is digital. So we try and avoid phrases like TV and digital. And actually, when we look at the core question that we've been asked today, it's one of those questions that sits into a suite of conflicts that people like to posit. So, broadcast versus linear IP as a kind of tech distribution question. Will broadcast lose out to on-demand? So broadcast and on-demand as a content format question and debate. Will scheduled television give over and lose out to television in which, as Chris said earlier on, consumers can choose and make up their own schedules? So scheduled versus recommendations. Will recommendations replace the program guide? So very often the industry has these debates where we have to position these two things and then try and choose one of them as a winner. And I try and avoid these things in general, because I don't find any of those arguments particularly compelling, because all of that stuff is probably going to come to fruition. And actually, most of the stuff we've seen over the last few years have really just been about delivering more choice and more control to consumers in the broader TV mix. And so we like to kind of focus on those issues of choice and control. When people say to me, "Oh yes, but what about the internet?" Surely the internet is a new context for television. Again, we try and step back from that kind of statement. But the one thing we would acknowledge is that there is an increasing variety in the context within which TV is consumed. So we do recognise in our discussions that there is an audience context, which is the traditional context in which TV has been consumed. Is what we think about TV when we think about it, sitting around with a group of friends or a group of family, and sitting using a shared device to watch something weighted towards live in a group context. So the audience context for TV, and what we've seen in the last decade, obviously, is the arrival of the context on the right, the user context. So when we're talking about the consumer view, users versus audiences is a much more interesting thing for us to understand from the consumer point of view than describing some of the conflicts as tech. TV versus digital doesn't make sense to us, but audiences make sense. And users make sense. And we do recognise that those two things are very different. If we break them down kind of into the features we care about, the shared audience versus the individual user, traditionally in a shared audience group, we would not expect viewers to be logged in. I know that some of the new app providers like Netflix like you to click a profile before committing to watching, but I don't know about your house. I spend a huge amount of my Netflix consuming using my wife's profile or my kids' profile. We haven't yet got a properly effective mechanism for understanding how to build profiles into kind of a shared audience arena. And obviously, in the other side, in the user world, we're dealing with a television context where we can expect people to be predominantly logged in, so where we can expect to capture data and identify people, and where things like personalization make more sense. So However many times we've tried, interactivity around television on the big screen is harder to deliver and harder to get consumers to engage with than it is on individual small screens. So when we look forward to the future of television, whether it's broadcast or on demand, it's much easier to think about interactive formats and choice formats coming into the smaller screens. And measurement. If you're dealing at the front end of things, we really need to understand what's happening, who's viewing, who's watching things. Where you have a shared audience dominating an industry like we do with television, we need audience measurement techniques, which are much more about estimation. So things, in the UK, we have Barb. There are Barb equivalent companies in every single significant media market. Whereas over on individual devices, the world of kind of web-based measurement techniques has grown up. And those two things kind of sit uneasily next to each other because they're actually different. And when we're looking forward to a future where actually both those things come into play. And, finally, from a commercial point of view, this is a very advertising kind of perspective statement. The traditional TV advertising world is locked down into kind of tight commercial deals where a lot of the stuff on the web is outside of commercial deals. So there's traditionally a very different commercial approach to these two worlds. So none of that talks about a technology. And we always say from the consumer's point of view that we can ignore all the tech. There is two kinds of telly. There's live telly and there's on-demand telly. And everything else is just details. So live channels versus on-demand, we both have a future because with live telly, events, sports, news, all those kind of things are weighted towards it. And it's really, what we're really positing in the future is some kind of combination of live and on-demand, and how that gets presented and how it's presented to the screens and accessed, again, comes down just to kind of functionality design. But as I say, there are only two forms of telly. Having said that, if you kind of break it down, we always do this little landscaping thing when we're talking about what is television. I know that's a kind of a bizarre question, but if you ask 15 people in the media industry what television is, you'll get 20 different answers. And so when we're talking particularly about the evolution of advertising around these formats, we like to kind of write down what TV is. And you'll see I kind of carrying on this internet and TV paradigm. Clearly, we know that television historically has been based around channels. I don't agree with Chris that channels will eventually go away because people will want to proactively design their own schedules using technology and functionality. Every time we do some research, this comes back to us that your average consumer likes someone else doing the work. They like the serendipity of a channel. If you sat most people down and said, what do you want to watch tonight? They wouldn't know. So we have to be very careful when we're taking a technology perspective on the TV industry, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That actually one of the things that a broadcast channel does, ignoring the tech of how it gets into the home, is it presents program choices that someone else has gone to the effort of making. It presents schedules that someone else has gone to the time of developing, and having someone else do the work is a huge benefit of a scheduled live channel. However it gets into the home. We're always big fans of recording. We don't talk enough about recording, and clearly recording tech, however it's configured, is symbiotic with a broadcast channel. The two make each other work. So one of the things we say in support of this idea that broadcast channels will stay around is that PVRs will get better. And a personal video recorder, being able to record broadcast, makes broadcast work even better for you, because you can, when you want to, build your own on-demand schedule, taking stuff off broadcast. So there's a lovely symbiosis between broadcast and PVR that we shouldn't throw away when we talk about the future. And we would point out that one of the companies that most recently launched a new personal video recorder, a new hard drive based recorder, was Amazon. And Amazon recognized the power and importance, or if you want to be a significant platform, one of the super aggregators that Yvonne mentioned a moment ago, one of the key things is to manage and control hardware in a consumer's home. And obviously someone like Amazon already is doing a good job getting Amazon Alexas into people's homes, but they've now got PVR. So the idea that an Amazon-type company will increasingly control recording capabilities in our home makes us feel that the future of broadcast is sound. So, and then obviously over on the internet, in the early days of the internet, we had catch-up players launched that gave us advertiser-funded on-demand. Then we had simulcast, that terrible word for streaming a version of a live channel into a catch-up app. And so for a long while, TV was split between old-fashioned telly on the left and catch-up apps on the right. And this is really where that TV and digital split came on board. But as everyone knows, evolution kept happening. So that fake split between TV and digital went away because advertiser-funded VOD leapt up onto the big screen. Most television platforms and most smart TVs nowadays have the ability to deliver advertiser-funded VOD or host an app of some form alongside broadcast. So, it is the standard condition for most TV systems to be able to offer linear channels and on-demand very closely linked. And also, we're beginning to see, IP streaming. And I won't get into the merits of over-the-air versus IP streaming. There are better people on this presentation to get into that. But I'm conscious that there are platforms where both of those exist side by side and do a very good job. And then, of course, in the rest of the landscape, we've got SVOD, so Netflix, etc., arrived first of all over on our PCs on the right. But again, very quickly, the subscription VOD players and the other new VOD players made the leap up onto the big screen. So again, when we look at a lot of the sophisticated television platform aggregators in the world, they've got Netflix on them already. They're getting Amazon Prime in. So if you look at Virgin in the UK, for instance, it's got Netflix and Amazon on-demand apps built into Netflix. If we look at Sky, Sky's got Netflix and Disney Plus built into the platform. So advertiser VOD and subscription VOD has leapt up onto the big screen. So, it's a much more complicated landscape, which makes us nervous about these binary questions about, is it going to be telly, is it going to be something else, etc. And the overarching message is that if the industry gets it right, then consumers aren't aware and don't care. And I'll just stick up an image from UView. So, here's the UView program, guys, with live channels. All the channels on this page are coming in over the aerial. Further down the program guide, all the channels are coming in over IP. The only reason you know is if you know that those three little dots under the number signify that this channel is being delivered IP. We research this with consumers all the time. They have no idea that one of those is internet, one of them is broadcast, don't care. And you step back and you think, actually, why should they care? Consumers don't have to care, don't have to know. A lot of this debate is us on the supply side arguing about technicalities. Most consumers just care about, is it on live or can I go and find it and watch it later? And those two things are the key drivers from the consumer perspective. And this is good design. A program guide on UView masks all those differences. It just presents a lineup of channels delivered using a number of different technologies. And I think in the UView lineup, there is both broadcast over an aerial, multicast IP, and some just normal unicast IP channels. So there's a good mix of tech in there, all invisible to the consumer. None of it matters to them. And the other thing we should say, there's been a lot of focus when we have questions about the death of broadcast, about the shift of viewing away from tellies. In the last decade, the whole narrative in our industry has been about the growth of mobile, the growth of laptops. It's really been about the story's been about the move of viewing away from the big screen onto the small screen. This little bar chart here comes from ThinkBox, the UK sales house representative, using some Barb analysis to split average viewing across all audiences. And they had about 4 hours, 42 minutes in the UK. But they do a version of this split by different age segments, and it does vary in terms of youth. The thing that we're interested in is the device split. Because clearly the viewing is split increasingly between big screen and small screen. And over the last 10 years of this debate about the death of broadcast, the direction of travel has been towards small screen. What's weird now is that the direction of travel is changing. and we're beginning to see viewing of some of the newer format concepts moving from small screen up to big screen. And there's some obvious things. And if you examine your own behavior, you'll start to spot them. So we used to watch Netflix exclusively on our laptops and our tablets until it started moving up onto our tellies. And now the majority of Netflix viewing is on a big family shared screen, not a small screen. YouTube is going through the same thing. YouTube was exclusively a PC and mobile device experience. You moved away from the big screen because YouTube wasn't on the big screen. What we're seeing on smart tellies and set-top boxes is a reversal. So viewing is moving back up onto the shared screen as YouTube moves up there. And it's a really interesting phenomenon. What you see is that consumers just want to watch the best telly on the biggest screen available at any one time. And because the cost of screens has plummeted, you can go and get yourself a 55-inch flat screen for about 300 quid, which delivers an amazing picture. And we're seeing the total ownership of big screens starting to increase. And people don't throw them away. So more and more homes have got multiple big screens. And so we will continue to see a trend of some of this stuff from the right-hand column back up onto big screen because people will want to watch telly. And final comment. We sat the other day as a family watching some sport. We have Sky Q at home. So we were watching some sport. So as traditional TV as you can get, sitting around our pay TV platform watching some sport. It so happened we were watching the sport through YouTube on Sky. And actually what we were watching was sport not available on a channel in the UK. We were watching some Gaelic football from our family's hometown in Ireland through YouTube on a Skybox. So we were watching a unicast stream through a web app hosted in a pay TV operator's interface through a set-top box on a big screen in a lounge as a group. So was that broadcast? Was that telly? Was that digital? Was it online? Well, at the end of the day, it didn't matter. None of those definitions actually mattered to us. We were watching telly as a group. We were watching live telly and having a good time. So we, as a family, we didn't care what the industry did to get it to us. They managed to get it to us where we wanted to watch it, and we watched it, and that was the key there. Sorry, this shouldn't be objectives. This is meant to be summary. So big issues. Consumers don't care about the tech distinction. Really not interested. They leave it to us to solve as long as they get what they want when they want it. They do care about choice and control. So functionality is what they care about. They don't even care about the distinction between PVR and demand, as long as they can get to the thing they wanted to watch and get to it quickly. And we're beginning to see a blurring of those concepts. Having said all this, and kind of defending broadcast, I wouldn't be surprised to see a couple of hundred channels go bust over the next few years as we add more functionality. And we always say that in the early days of multi-channel, when we went from 5 channels to 500 channels, that was much about our inability to deliver functionality. It was a tech failure because we couldn't deliver control, so we had to deliver choice. So in those early days when there was no on-demand and there was no PVR, it was easier just to give people 500 channels and let them jump between them. Now that we've got really good on-demand, we've got really good recommendations, we've got really good recording, we don't need 500 channels. So even though I'm defending the future role of broadcast, I can see that the number of channels will go down. New concepts merging into the old. When Netflix launched, it was going to kill telly. It was on my PC and it was going to kill telly. Netflix is now a channel in my Skybox. This scary new concept has just been blended into the traditional landscape for TV, and it now sits alongside Disney as another channel. And new behaviours. These scary young people with their crazy web TV watching on their phones. Actually, you give them a big screen, and they'll sit and watch a big screen. And so what we're seeing as big screens get cheaper and bigger is that a lot of those behaviours that scared us as an industry are actually really just people seeking out choice and control, and better technology and better functionality will revert those behaviours back into traditional TV viewing behaviours. So that really was kind of an upbeat view of the future of television. We're very positive about it. We firmly believe it's going to be a mix of all those things. Every bit of distribution capability, every bit of presentation functionality will find its place in the mix. And I do think eventually we will stop having these debates about the kind of competing visions of the future. Is it all going to be this, or is it all going to be that? And that really was everything I was going to throw at you. So thank you very much for listening. I'm now going to hand over to Maria of Omdia, and I think I can take my hands off the screen and say thank you and hand back to the team.
Hello, Nigel. I'm not sure if I am on the screen yet, but I hope people can see my deck. So yes, my name is Maria Ruagete. You can find me here in Twitter under Maria_Agete. I work for Omdia, and there is a lot of data and research in this presentation, trends about the future of pay TV, online, and channels. So I will be happy to send you the deck on demand. So we're now part of Omdia, and Omdia aggregates in one place the research of IHS Market Technology, OBUM, and other research organizations, all part now of Omdia and in Informatech. So we're going to discuss some online and TV video market developments. We're going to discuss who are the major video players at the moment, how are media companies reacting to these big players. We're going to touch another topic we discussed today, bundling and the power of partnerships, to finalize with a question about the future. What is the future of linear TV channels in an on-demand world? There are lots and lots of video streaming services. Some of them are paid, some of them are free, some of them are thematic, some of them are general, entertainment, sports, language specific, lots and lots of video services around the world. But of all these players, there are three, Netflix, Amazon, and Disney, that they are the top 3 online pay video streamers in the world. So we see here in Lilac that Netflix is the #1 in terms of subscribers, the biggest video player in the world. Disney is the #6. Next to them, you will see in pink that Netflix is third. Here we refer in terms of revenues, because we cannot forget that despite, yes, Netflix leads the video subscriptions above any pay TV operator in the world, in terms of revenues is the #3 player, because 1 and 2 are AT&T and Comcast, traditional pay TV operators. Also for Amazon and Disney, in terms of revenues, they are not even in the top 10, and Disney is in the top 7. But if I'm telling you that Netflix is #1, Amazon is 5, Disney is 6, you may wonder, so who are the other big players? How can they be bigger than these 3? Chinese players, China Telecom, Baidu, Tencent. We always forget about the Chinese players, and these are key leaders in the world. So we have Baidu, #2, we have Tencent, #3, we have China Telecom, #4. So we cannot ignore or forget to mention them, because especially now there is a lot of acquisitions, mergers, consolidation being initiated by Chinese companies. So there are more than 1 billion pay video subscriptions in the world, pay online video subscriptions, and 1/3 of those online subscriptions are in hands of these big 3 players, Netflix, Amazon, and Disney. Recently, we published this survey, we did in the UK. We did this survey in April, asking people, which is your pay subscription service at the moment? And we were surprised how so quickly, in less than a month, Disney became the 3rd most popular over-the-top pay video service in the UK. #1 and 2, Netflix and Amazon, not a surprise. But yes, it was very impressive that in such a short time, Disney Plus already overtook Now TV and is now in more than 4 million homes in the UK. Of course, the lockdown helped. Of course, having family together, kids at home, it helped for the success of Disney Plus. We expect this big growth. It will smooth over the months, so it will not be such a huge take-up like it happened during this quarter. Again, Disney very good position, not only in the UK, in every country where they launch. But we are talking a lot about pay video services. We cannot forget that free video services still dominate the UK video market. So when we ask people on a monthly basis, which of these services do you consume, number 1 and 2 becomes YouTube and BBC iPlayer. So these two are the most popular video services in the UK. And if we ask people above 65, then BBC is the number 1 service they like to watch in the UK. So we cannot forget the importance of public service broadcasters and the importance of AVOD services. So in the middle of this crowded market, how are media companies reacting? How can companies compete with these global players when we say that 3 of them already have 1/3 of the market? What can the others do? So we have seen from the public broadcaster side lots of consolidation, not only consolidation, partnerships between them creating joint offers. For example, BBC and ITV together launching BritBox that is available not only in the UK, it's available in the US, launching in Australia. So they realize that alone it's difficult for them to compete. Together, joining forces with other channels, they can compete in this world. So the same that we see in the UK, we see it in France with Salto that is about to launch, Join in Germany already there, or Logie TV in Spain. And of course, other studios are also launching their own video services, their own D2C subscription video services. HBO Max that launched recently, Peacock now, and Apple TV Plus that we haven't heard a lot from them recently, but they're also playing a key place in the video market. And as I mentioned before, Tencent and acquisitions, we all heard a couple of weeks ago how they now acquire the hybrid over-the-top service iFlix. So we will see more mergers, more acquisitions, more consolidation going forward. So where are we now? We are now in 2020, where over-the-top already overtook pay TV. We didn't expect this to happen this year. In our initial forecast, we thought this would happen in 2021, but thanks to the lockdown, because people were locked at home and sometimes to subscribing to pay TV services, it requires someone going to your house, install a box, install a satellite dish. It was easier during lockdown to subscribe to online video services than to subscribe to pay TV. So we saw a lot of growth in online, and as I said, now online subscriptions overtook in 2020 pay TV. So cord cutting is no longer a US phenomenon. By that we mean that we always heard about cord cutting in the UK, in the US, while people cutting the cord, the famous cord nevers, those that they never subscribe to a pay TV service. But this is no longer something that happens exclusive in the US. All around the world, in different countries, and also looking at some operators, I have here some examples, OSN in the Middle East, or even Foxtel in Australia, many operators, many countries, they have experienced cord cutting, a decline in pay TV, and as we can see, the lockdown didn't help pay TV, and they saw some churn as people prefer to move to online services for multiple reasons. We spoke a lot about aggregation during this event today. And what is aggregation, or what some people call the super aggregation? So what has changed is aggregation always happened. Pay TV operators, telcos always aggregate channels all in one place. What it changed now is who are these super aggregators? Who are the companies aggregating video content? And not just video, we saw so many announcements of games, music, many types of consumer services, and aggregated all in one place. So we have now Amazon, Apple, Roku leading this aggregator space. In particular, Amazon in light blue, you see there, how they have been playing critical role aggregating channels. So many thematic channels, those channels that in that big map you saw like they seem small. In order to go directly to the consumer, many times they need to call the likes of Amazon, Apple, or Roku to be able to expand, to help to be able to be held by this global coverage of companies like Amazon to expand their services. And you can see there subscriptions country by country, and again, Amazon dominating the space when we speak about content aggregation. But again, going back to pay TV operators and telcos, they are still becoming super aggregators. They're aggregating not just content, they are aggregating also Netflix, Amazon, Disney, all the streaming video services. You have here a chart with aggregation by region. Asia Pacific has been very active, Middle East as well. In the mobile space, lots of aggregation, so mobile operators offering video streaming services as part of the package. So this will be even accelerated more this year and next year. We will see more and more partnerships going forward. And this is an example of Vodafone in Spain, where in one place they make a lot of noise about having so many streaming video services all in one place. HBO España, Filming, Netflix, Amazon Prime Video. So different routes telcos have followed in Spain, some of them investing in their own original content, and others decided not to invest in content, just aggregate content for others. So how many video services people are prepared to take at home? Are we saturated with the amount of services available out there? When we speak about services in general, pay or free, US leads this ranking, almost 10 video services per home. Again, this is pay and free. It has been increasing, meaning the appetite for video is still on the rise. So there is no saturation yet. People are still willing to consume more video services. Of course, when we speak about pay, they're not willing to pay for so many. So the average is below 3. In the US, almost 3, but in every other country is around 2. So when we speak about paying for those services, yes, of course, the numbers decline. And on average, I would say is around 2 of those video services. We spoke a lot today about linear viewing. Is live TV dead? Is linear TV dead? We can see it's not dead at all. Linear TV here in light blue is still the dominant way of watching TV, is the most popular form. But of course, when you see there other colors, social media in particular, huge growth in social media viewing. In particular, I want to highlight here TikTok. Huge growth of TikTok. The amount of time people are spending in TikTok, especially younger audiences, is already overtook the likes of Instagram and the Snapchat, and is very close now with Facebook. So fantastic growth in social media watching, in particularly TikTok and user-generated content. Not surprised that during the lockdown that linear TV was on the rise, increased a lot. In Italy, people spend 6 hours at home watching TV, 2 hours more than previous years. In Spain, almost 5 hours. In the UK, 4. But in every single country where lockdown happened, people found TV as a way to entertain themselves, and massive increase between 1 and 2 hours across Europe. Here is the UK as well. Massive growth during lockdown in the time spent watching TV, and in all around the world. This is a sample. Look at China, 7 hours a day. People were at home watching TV. So in a way, TV has never lived a fantastic moment for people in the content space. Of course, there are also challenges related with lockdown, but in terms of content consumption, it has been the best time ever. All this consumption of TV, all these people watching Netflix and other services meant that there was an increase in traffic. So telcos saw unprecedented spikes in traffic of all types, not just watching video streaming, conferencing, doing virtual events like this one, where everyone is connected. We have lots of people connected from all over the world in this event. I heard people from 40 countries. So thank you all for listening today. But yes, this is putting a lot of increase in the traffic in telcos who have to provide better connectivity than ever. Which parts of the entertainment industry are growing? So yes, it's not a surprise that it's the red region in this chart. The online video world is the one that is growing the most, but we cannot say that the others are dead. The traditional, what we call traditional pay TV, still represents most of the revenues in the entertainment spend. so we cannot forget that. And then if we look at 2020, of course, huge declines of sectors like cinema. Cinemas are closed, theaters are closed, so not a good time for them, but we hope next year things will start to recover for the cinema chains. Probably not this year, but just in 2021, and they will go back to levels pre-COVID-19. Just to finalize this presentation, is this the end of the 500-channel universe? This year, when we could still travel around the world, I was in Miami, NAPTE Miami, and there John Hendricks, founder of Discovery and CuriosityStream, said there will only be 40 channels in the US, and mainly will be news and the sports, and all the other content will be on demand. Yes, we don't expect to have 500 of channels going forward. It is true that many will go on demand. We have seen also companies like Disney removing channels from Sky and others going direct to the consumer, going on demand. So for sure, the channel universe will change. Many reasons for that. With cord cutting means that all these channels, they don't get the same level of carriage fees that they used to get. If cord cutting is happening, they need to find new sources of revenue, hence the importance of going direct to the consumer. Although international is going a bit better than what it happens in the UK, in the US. I will be happy to send you the deck, so don't worry if you cannot follow all the data here. As I said before, lots of mergers and acquisitions, companies have to work together more than ever. We have seen lots of mergers happening, Viacom acquiring Pluto TV, a very interesting AVOD service where we have, as we said today in the first presentation, a linear collection of on-demand content, but people can see it in a linear way. Lots of consolidation, or Disney acquiring Fox, lots and lots of mergers, acquisitions to compete with the big players, as we said in the beginning of the presentation. So just the last slide, what is going to happen? We still think linear channels will continue to grow outside the US. We still believe a lot in live content, news, sport, but also entertainment and events. So live content will still be critical for audiences. It will not disappear. Linear TV will not die. Live content will still be critical. And of course, most owners will focus on D2C strategies, but they will have to differentiate. They will have to find the unique selling points to compete in this crowded world. And yes, Disney has closed their channels in the UK. I'm sure more will happen with other studios and with other companies, but at the same time, they will not lose, they will not risk the carriage fees, the money they get with current partnerships neither. So I think this is a bit what we expect. Some changes going forward, but some things will never die, like the love for TV around the world. So with this note, thank you. As I said, lots of data in this deck. Happy if you mail me at mariaruaguete@omdia.com. I will send you this deck so you can find more data when you have your own time. Thank you very much, and I'm passing now to Ian.
Thank you very much, Maria. Right, so very interesting set of information presented from the various experts that we've got here today. Actually, I'd just like to probably return to Maria a little bit, and it comes from a question actually that's raised by Rebecca Stark, which we'll just share. So this is actually about how coronavirus is affecting the choices the viewing public make when consuming news and media. And do you think there's a long-term change to the market as a result?
So, yes, we have data on how the viewing changed. And of course, news was one of the categories that was on the rise. People wanted to consume news to see what was happening. But it's not the only genre. So we saw a lot of increase in library movies, in all catalogs, what people call comfort viewing. So people wanted to watch that content that makes them feel relaxed. A lot of increase in kids' content, not surprising when kids were at home. Do we see a long-term change? We do believe the numbers will go down a bit again, so we don't think they will, and we saw it already in the UK now that people can go out more and they can do other things rather than staying at home. The numbers are declining, but they're still higher than pre-COVID-19. So I think people are getting used to watch a lot of content, to binge watching even more than before. So yes, we think that in the long term, the love of TV has increased as a form of entertainment. But of course, in terms of total viewing time, it will decline. It will not keep at the numbers that I saw before, 7 hours, 6 hours a day.
Okay. And really, I suppose what we're looking for here, and it's something where people have believed there is the situation here, that any transition is always not a linear approach here. And so there is this question about what would be the trigger for a rapid increase in any transition or any movement from broadcast to on demand or to any internet delivered service. Is COVID one of those things? And if not, then what are the main factors that you see coming in the future that would maybe further accelerate any transition?
COVID accelerated for sure, because as I said before, during COVID, to subscribe to an online service is very easy. You go to the internet or whatever, you can sign very easily. You don't need a set-top box, you don't need any installation. But if you want to subscribe to video and you want to subscribe via a pay TV operator, sometimes it does require an installation, delivering a box or installing a satellite dish. So we did notice that during COVID, the huge growth that it was already happening in online video, it accelerated. So accelerated, and people, what did they subscribe to? I mean, Netflix reported the best quarter ever. They never had so many subscriptions as they had during COVID. Disney as well, you saw the numbers. Now the number 3 player in the UK, number 4 in the US. So for sure, COVID play an important role in people realizing how easy it is to subscribe to an online video service, and even more important, how easy it is to cancel it as well. So in the same way you subscribe, you can also cancel in one click. You don't need to call anyone. You don't need to return any box. So COVID-19 accelerate how easy it is to subscribe and unsubscribe from an online video service.
Okay, excellent. I'd like to actually maybe switch across to something that Nigel said during his presentation, actually, which really generated a question for me here. And that was really, you basically said that consumers don't really care about where their TV comes from. How much do you feel about that? Is that based on analysis, or is that based on research, or is that a general feeling? Nigel.
It comes from both sources. I mean, it's one of those themes that has been in the background of lots of the research we've done over the years. We did do some work just recently with the new Sky Q box, which is doing a good job of blending recorded and on-demand together. And we were testing whether people were aware what they were using. And what we found is where people were watching a series that was currently on TV and they recorded some of the episodes, that quite often we were testing voice commands. So we were getting them to use the voice command to pull an episode up. And we would stop it some minutes into the viewing and ask them whether they're watching a recorded version or an on-demand version. And most of the time, because of the design of the new service, they were telling us they didn't know. And very often they would follow it up with that question: does it matter? And so it was a consumer question, comes out very often when you ask them about the nuances of delivery of TV and they don't know. Most consumers ask that next question: does it matter? Am I meant to know? And you can see in their eyes, they just don't care. What they really want is the quickest access to the program they know they want when they know they want one, and then help to find one they don't know they want when they don't know what they want. But the most important thing is speed of access to something they want to watch, not choice of delivery mechanism.
Okay, so if it's not really something that's being driven by the consumer's perspective of any deep desire, maybe except flexibility. Another question, again, which comes from your presentation is, what's the advantage to the broadcaster or operator of a content service from any move to online usage? Is there an advantage?
Can you just define what you mean by content service in that context?
And like a broadcaster, like the BBC or Sky or anyone else really like that. Is there a particular advantage from moving from the broadcast to the internet delivery world, apart from, of course, on-demand capability? In other words, why would Sky turn off their broadcast side, for example?
I suppose there's two elements to that. First of all, I can't see them turning off their broadcast side for a very long time. I can see them adding in IP-delivered channels into their mix, which they don't really do in any kind of significant way, just because it improves choice. So does the new technology that we're discussing improve consumer choice? Does it add more choices? And if the answer is yes, then that's a good thing. From a provider point of view, I'm sure that there are scale and cost issues. If I'm in the back of my head, I'm thinking about BT Sport, which on every platform it exists on, apart from Sky, is an IP stream. On Sky, it has to pay for satellite to get onto the box. I'm sure if they were offered the option to turn off satellite and shift to an IP stream, they would probably choose it from a simplification and a cost point of view. But that's a slightly different thing. So there's two different things at play there. One is improving consumer choice, and the other one is improving cost efficiency in distribution. Bring those two things together, and you have nirvana for the future of the TV industry.
Okay. Okay, good. And related to that, and I'm moving across to Chris here, actually. We've got a question just come in from Rupert Brunn, and maybe it's partly answering what Nigel referred to. Why would any broadcaster or operator move to OTT? And quite a sort of straightforward statement that says OTT services can innovate faster, pretty much. So what's your thoughts on this, Chris, regarding the innovation side of content and content delivery?
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, right? I think changes in the head end and changes in satellite distribution, are generally a very inexpensive and complicated thing to achieve. In the OTT world, for example, if I look at the way that we've now got video and platforms as software, the ability to, run a script and deploy an entire OTT platform as a standalone environment, in under sort of 15 minutes and have it configured and operated, that's pretty attractive, right? I don't know, much in the way of satellite infrastructure that you can do that with, where you want to innovate and rip apart the core of what something does. I think to kind of touch on Nigel's point around the cost, CDN delivery is still far, far more expensive, than satellite. And, I still think that, this is one of the sort of hurdles we need to get over, is not so much, as I mentioned, the sort of technology capability, right? There's a commercial problem and, involved in that. And I think that commercial problem is still, the CDNs and the delivery. A few people have tried to sort of go it alone and make their own CDNs. And, Netflix are a great example of that with Open Connect, and it kind of works. But, when you look at the millions and millions of dollars of spend that the OTT providers put into, maintaining this kind of infrastructure and estate, it's not insignificant, right? So I still think we got a little way to go. I think the cost economics need to get better. I think they are getting better, right? If you look at, levels of infrastructure and how much it costs to run and distribute now versus, 3 years ago versus 6 years ago versus 10 years ago, the economies of scale are far, far better. But I still think there are some things we need to get over. Okay.
And in terms of enhancements to the sort of innovation, things like voice control, I have a question here which I've lost the person who's actually asked the question, and it's about actually innovation in things like voice control. Is that something which is enabled better with internet delivered platforms, or is it something that is, as Sky have done and other parties have done, is it still something that's viable for improving the quality of those broadcast delivered platforms?
Yeah, I think it can be done right. I think it can be done in both. And I think that the differences are negligible, right? Whether we're doing this over OTT and you've got something powered by Siri as an example, right? Or something powered by, the backend provider that looks after Sky's platform, it's software, under the hood, right? And actually what enables this to work? Well, it's not a satellite, right? It's an IP return path. You know, so the reality is it's that IP return path, it's the TCP IP, it's the software stack under the hood that enables that innovation, right? We're still sat here fighting for broadcast, and no one's prepared to acknowledge that actually if we rip out the TCP IP or, you know, the return path, you know, the internet socket on the back of the skybox, all that wonderful innovation, it goes away, right? So, you know, which way do we want it?
Yeah. So that actually raises an interesting question, and that is about the infrastructure side of things. And, you know, satellite fairly easy in terms of its ability to get around an entire country, and the fact that you just have to place a dish up in pointing in the right general direction. But a question that I come up from looking at this as well is that all of this lovely internet innovation and content delivery requires basically ubiquitous broadband. And that's really quite a critical part of this. And not everywhere has that. And maybe sometimes we forget that when looking at the European markets and US markets. We're going to look around the world. I wanted to maybe raise a question then towards Yvonne, because I know the DTG have been thinking about this, particularly for the UK situation, where we have various parts of the country which are really not well served by broadband. So what are your thoughts there about that, about the transition and the impact of broadband penetration on that, Yvonne?
Yeah, so that's certainly where we need to involve politics, so the government and Ofcom as a regulator. So as I mentioned before, the goal is to have full fiber coverage until 2025, which is a fantastic goal, but maybe need to speed up at some point, especially that 5G networks and trials are coming as well. So the interesting question will be whether we still need fiber if we have 5G and even in the perspective already 6G. I mean, Samsung is working on 6G in the perspective of 2028 already, so which is, I would say, rather soon for such a new technology. So what happens if we're too slow with the fiber coverage? And then also with the requirement of saying, you know, we need to cover, I think it's 96 or 97% of the population, which means if you cover all the big cities, then you've actually covered the percentage of the population. So the requirement should rather be the coverage of, you know, the countrysides as well. I mean, of the size of the country as such, not just of the population, in order to avoid too many black spots, basically, yeah. So,
and a derivative sort of question from that, okay, if we go through a transition, and as broadband evolves, does that mean that part of the reason why broadcast exists still in the future is because of that need to fulfill those use cases of filling in the gaps that we have in that infrastructure?
Well, I think there are various dimensions to this. The first, as I also mentioned in my presentation, broadcast is still the most efficient way to deliver content. So there are environmental aspects to it, but also business aspects. And when we think about public broadcast, then there's also a contract that they have to serve. And this is, I mean, it's television for the entire population, not just for a niche or for those who pay. So this, I think, is different, and this is where legacy comes in. It's at least right now impossible to simply switch off DTT and say, well, we just offer streaming services, and that's it, because you will exclude a certain part of the population. And that generation is still big, who prefers a linear channel over a streaming service. So especially as long as that generation, you know, is still a big part of the population, I think it will be very, very difficult to do a full move to the IP world. So I'm seeing this as a hybrid model for the next 10, 15 years. Obviously, if beyond that, if there's still a demand from certain generations for a live and linear channel, that's to be seen and to be decided.
Okay. And that actually is an interesting comment to make, because you talk about the cost of delivering to the mass market. But I've got a comment here by Graham Turner, actually, a previous chair of the this particular technical network under its previous name. And he had a very an interesting statement here that cost of broadband is high when you take the view of trying to deliver mass market delivery overall. But as he said here, satellite transponder costs can only be justified for mass market viewing. Most Sky channels could save tens of millions of dollars by going entirely OTT. And the question here is, are we seeing a move where we're moving away from mass market consumption on a particular set schedule to being individual on-demand viewing, and that makes the broadband delivery more financially effective? Yvonne.
So, sorry, I thought it was an open question.
Well, it can be an open question as well. We can certainly throw it open to anyone, but maybe you can start with that one.
Yeah, so that's definitely a tricky question. So obviously each business model becomes more attractive with the mass market. But even already established streaming services, they do have niche content. So this doesn't mean that, and again, this separation between the content and the technology layer, just because we're talking about broadcast or broadband as a way to deliver content, this has to be a mass market or a niche market. So obviously with a certain business model, you can achieve that you're serving a certain niche audience with a certain niche content, that's for sure. But yeah, so I mean, still with a higher audience, certainly it becomes more attractive business-wise, and broadcast is still efficient because it's accessible to everyone at any time. So and still the most grown at the moment, at least, system. So, however, with the rise of the internet and having faster internet connections, it will be more accessible to more and more people.
Okay. Actually, you're probably going to want to shift across to Nigel, who's waving his hand. And basically, this is a question that's coming from Frank Aycock, actually. And it's actually about that mass market. So let me just push to does the age group make a difference to the mass market? And if you wish to answer the previous question, please do, Nigel.
I'll kind of wrap those two things together, because the thing I was going to say was I think it's dangerous to think about broadcast as a single thing. If you look at the range of channels on a reasonable television platform nowadays, they range from the big national channels that could expect to get between 5 and 10 million for a big soap opera on a weekday evening, down to incredibly niche channels, which are single content genre niche channels that may only get 25,000 audience. And so I don't think there's a standard answer that applies to all channels. And if we look at even the public sector broadcasters, without naming a particular name, it's not uncommon for a public sector broadcaster to have 4 or 5 channels in their lineup. The top channel would be a big mass channel. The bottom channels get increasingly niche as you go down. And we've always thought that it's likely in the future that a big public sector broadcaster will maintain broadcast for the top 1 or 2 of its channels, and will, over time, move the smaller ones down to being IP, and they will manage a mix of networks. My point earlier on about BT was that BT Sport is already running its own multicast network to supply its own boxes around the country. And so their decision with Sky, they have to run the Sky, as your questionnaire said, the hugely expensive Sky satellite distribution just to service the Sky set-top boxes, whereas they already have the multicast network delivering their content already. So for them, it will just be about removing one layer of cost. For the broadcasters in the public sector example I gave, it's really about stripping out unnecessary cost. If you're only hitting 100,000 viewers on a particular channel, you might as well move that one down to IP whilst keeping the others on broadcast. And then the final point, which I thought was great, was the question earlier on about innovation. We like to think, again, BBC Three in the UK got taken off air, which we've always thought was a terrible mistake. If you were in charge of bringing BBC Three back onto an EPG, back into linear distribution, I think it's highly unlikely that you would go to a broadcast solution nowadays. Because of the nature of the audience, you might argue that an IP stream channel version of BBC Three could be incredibly innovative. It could be interactive. It could be the first linear channel to properly explore links to social and interactivity within the main EPG. It could do all sorts of amazing things. So I do think, with that long-winded answer, that we shouldn't treat all channels as a single thing, that we need to break them up into different groups, predominantly by size and by importance, by likelihood of having live television or not, likelihood of having sport or not. And all those factors, you would break probably all the channels in a traditional lineup into at least 4 clusters and come up with a different answer for each.
Okay. And in terms of that sort of innovation question and other aspects of what Nigel's responding with, Chris, do you have any sort of maybe some response to that or some input to that?
Yeah, I do. I think Nigel kind of touches on a good point, right? Sport gives us high request per second, right? It gives us peak request per second and peak concurrency, right? And I think when we talk about trying to simulate the broadcast model in the OTT world, and to Nigel's example of 5 or 10 million viewers watching a soap, the move to OTT and the transition of the experience flattens that curve. Right? We sort of soften our peak viewing period because the content is available when people want to watch it. We don't have this moment anymore where people sit down at 7 p.m. and tune into something that's a VOD asset. We're artificially creating the problem for ourselves by introducing that artificial notion of timing. When we look at live sports, there are countless live sports events, countless on a daily and a weekly basis globally that broadcast over OTT and IP in exactly the same way they do as broadcast. And very, very infrequently and rarely do we ever really hear about challenges at the delivery side. The challenges are around what I call control plane. It's entitlements, it's authorization, it's authentication. It's the bits where people can't get signed on, or they try to, play back a video and it says you got an entitlements error, right? I don't think the technology behind OTT is really the limiting factor. If we take away the notion of people watching things when we say they're going to watch them and we let them make their own choices, that peak request per second period completely flattens. The demand on infrastructure just isn't the same as it is today.
And is that something we've seen actually with COVID? Because at the end of the day, there was a big concern about impact on IP networks from COVID, that it would actually cause a complete breakdown in the broadband infrastructure of whole countries. And in actual fact, in reality, all we've found is that the peak is shifted.
100%. The peak is shifted. Exactly right. People watch when they want. Okay, there was, stories of people's, Zoom meetings getting interrupted and cameras not working. That's going to happen, right? But we didn't hear about mass market outage, or significant quality of experience challenges, that really killed the OTT viewing experience. And in the graphs and charts that Maria showed and the data that she presented, YouTube and BBC, iPlayer, the most consumed services in the UK as OTT propositions. Right? Sky wasn't down in 3rd or 4th or 5th. It was way down, right? I think the rise in subscriptions in OTT versus cable proves that accessibility and simplification is a driver enough for the consumer. It just proves to me that there is appetite, no doubt.
Okay. And just as we start to sort of wrap up, and we'll come into the poll question in a moment, I just want to be one question here, and that is, what do people believe now, going around for all of you here, what do you think the transition looks like for television in this day? Is it the fact that more of the same? Are we going to go towards a much more IP-centric world? Are we going to have a hybrid world? I'll probably be drawing historical comparisons to radio. When television was invented and first used, there was a great level of comment that radio would be dead. But here we are, sort of almost 100 years later, we still have radio today. It's changing, it's varying, but it's still here. So what does the panel here, going one by one through Chris, in the order of your presentation, starting with Chris, what do you think the 2035 will look like with regard to television?
Yeah, I mean, hearing all the arguments, I think it's sort of fair to say that, will we still have curated linear channels of played out VOD content? Maybe, probably. I really hope not, right? Because I think the experience needs to change. The point around IP delivery, I think that will transition more and more over the next sort of 5 years, 10 years. I think as Yvonne, really accurately touched upon. And, I'm mindful of this. It will not be an overnight shift, right? This is not a hard cut. It's not a hard deadline. It will be a transition phase. But I think the driver will be when the sort of traditional services start enabling more of their channels and content over IP as catalog search, or as IP only packages without needing a cable subscription, that's what's going to help, kind of drive that and transition that. And I think Maria's data, really, really backs that up, showing the rise in OTT subscriptions.
Okay. Yvonne?
Yeah, so I would fully agree it's a transition, and I believe by 2035 it's more of a hybrid world, so a mixture of a more dynamic and diverse environment, really, of content. So the interesting thought really is, how do we make it as pleasant as possible to the consumer, as easy as possible to the consumer, but also viable for the industry, from a business point of view. So it needs to match definitely both, and probably also to better understand what the consumer wants. So I'm hearing various opinions, and also just looking at the Q&A chat here, some people were saying, well, actually the consumer doesn't want to have choice, they're kind of lazy. And others are saying, yes, give the consumer the entire world of content, and we just need to build a good recommendation system. So I think the figures, or the way we think what the consumer wants, differs a little bit, and we might need to get a better understanding, a more detailed understanding what they really want, and that might be also in a very differentiated way by generations, by platforms, and so on. But at the end, I would also agree that the consumer doesn't care where the content comes from, as long as they can access. There's a bit of a story that I heard from one of our members, and he was searching for a movie that he finally watched and just picked from the search list, from the result list, and then just afterwards realized that there was the same version on a different platform, and I think it was Amazon, available in a higher quality in 4K. So he would have liked to choose the 4K version instead of the HD version. It was simply not available to him in the research list. So this is the transparency that we need. And at the end, he would not have cared about which platform to choose, as long as he has the piece of content he wants to watch and the quality he wants to watch.
Excellent. That actually leads a little bit into Nigel, because you're obviously someone who makes some good comments about what the consumers think about this and the business thinks about this. What's your thoughts about where we will be in 25 years? Or not 25 years, 2035 is not 25 years away, but 2035.
Yeah, well, from a tech distribution point of view, I would guess we would have a significantly lower number of channels delivered over the air, just for the reasons I said earlier on. I'm a believer in IP delivery of channels, but in terms of a shift from scheduled channels to on-demand recommendations, I'm more cautious, because I do recognise, particularly when we have these conversations with a techier group of people like this, there's always this kind of bewilderment that why aren't normal people like us? Why don't normal people use recommendations engines to self-fulfill a schedule based on an AI recommendation system about their viewing? And most normal people aren't like us. Most normal people quite like channels, and they quite like surprise, and they like the serendipity, and they like other people doing the work. And so people say, yeah, but we can use AI to suggest a schedule. I'm like, yeah, that's a channel. And so whenever you employ some professional in the industry to come up with a mixture of suggestions for you and put them together and suggest things that go well together, that's a channel. So I really believe that a large percentage of the viewing experience will be based on curated collections delivered in a line, and whether and sometimes we will default to AI and recommendations based on us and our data, but very often they will be curated collections based around an editorial brand and an editorial theme, because that's what consumers value.
Okay, excellent. And going now towards Maria. Maria, maybe you can give us what the numbers say, what the real facts say about our future in 2035.
Not only the numbers, most of the data is based on consumer survey. So it's not just about numbers talking to companies. We are talking a lot to consumers. We're running these consumer surveys in-house. And consumers now, yes, they're preferring online services, as we said, maybe because they're easy to subscribe, easy to cancel. User experience is important. If they subscribe to a service and the user experience is poorly, they will cancel immediately, even if it's during the free trial. We have seen this with some services available at the moment, when people didn't even finish the free trial and they cancel before the end. So user experience critical, good recommendations engines critical. I will see voice-activated devices playing a more important role. I don't think linear experience will disappear, but I think Chris mentioned it in the beginning. I believe in services more like Pluto TV, that they put for you a linear experience, so you don't have constantly to be switching what you want to watch. So things will change in the next 15 years, and I hope it will change, that we will not have more viruses, not more lockdowns. So I hope that will change as well, but TV will always play a critical role. The viewing time that increase highlights the importance, the love for TV, which is the important message for me.
Okay. Well, what I've just done actually is I've opened the poll, because we've got all of our opinions that we present to people here, but we have an audience here that we want to actually ask the same question we asked at the beginning of this particular webinar, this particular lecture. And just to make it clear again, I would like you all to vote, as you now feel after what you've heard, about whether traditional broadcast over the air or via cable will still have a significant role in a hybrid RF broadcast and internet-based approach. For example, in 2035, as we've just answered. So please do go and vote. And we'll then give it a few moments to see what the results will be. Okay. Interesting. We'll just give it a few more seconds to make sure you've all had time to vote. So what we would like to do now is maybe we can then, I've lost the link to actually push it to the screen, but it would be good maybe if we can then close the vote and see if we've had any influence at all over our audience. We're able to close the vote and push it to the screen. Right, so there we go. Hopefully everyone can see what's on screen now, which is the result of the vote. And it's about the same as it was at the beginning. So I think from the perspective of where we are today, I don't think we'd be able to sway or change any of the audience members' perspective on what the view of whether broadcast will be in place in the future. So that's an interesting result in itself. That's where we sit today. So what I would like to do now in terms of wrapping up is I'd like to thank everybody who has attended. Particularly, I would really like to thank all of our presenters today for coming along and spending this couple of hours on a Thursday afternoon in the middle of July in COVID season, when we're all locked into our home offices. Thank you again for doing what you've done today. It's been very interesting, very informative, and I'd like to actually point out that please do keep an eye out for future events from the IET. We will be doing more events, particularly with the gap in our schedules that come up now with the loss of IBC in September. So we do hope to see you in some of those events in the future. I just want to maybe just add, Lindsay, is there anything else we wish to add at the end of the call, at the end of the webinar? No? Okay, in that case, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you found it as informative as I did. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.